Welcome back. It's the Big Blue Banter New York Giants football podcast. I'm Dan Schneier. Joining as always my co-host Nick Filato and reoccurring guest John Schmeelky, who is arguably one of my favorite guests. I know he's one of your favorite guests, and one of the reasons is because he comes on the show pre-show and goes, "You know what? You guys got me for an hour and a half," and we're like, "You know what? Let's let it flow," because every single time you're on, John, you drop knowledge, and we're excited to hear about it today. We're going to talk some state of the Giants. We're going to talk some Giants draft, but before we do that, I want to say we are the lucky ones, the podcast that got to podcast with you in your new podcast room down there. And I like the setup. It's legit. For all the listeners, Nick and I tried to guess before the show. That ball back there, that Wilson ball, is signed by a player. Give your guess in the comments who you think it was signed by. I'll review it in a day or two. I was wrong. Nick was wrong. Let's see what happens for your guesses.
And believe it or not, the white one next to it is also signed. So if you want to give two guesses,
guess them both. Nick and I will try to guess the other as well throughout the show at some point.
At some
point, we'll just throw in random guesses. But
John, and I will say this, by the way, the white one was a freebie, so you can put that into your thing.
Oh, I like that. Okay, hints. So who would hand one out for free? All right, John, how you been, man?
Guys, I'm good, man. I'm just grinding away. I'm just over 100 players with the draft. Hope to get through another 50 before we get there. Just been grinding out Giants Huddle podcast. Charles Davis and Matt Miller went up this week. I got a couple other in the hopper that are coming out. Dane Brugler's Beast is coming out. We're recording this Tuesday night. That's coming out Wednesday. He's coming on our show on Thursday. So we got a bunch more guys coming, and just trying to inform as many people as you can about the players in this draft, which is really a fun and interesting one in a lot of different ways than it was last year.
John, absolutely love that you're back on the show. Thank you so much. And I'd like to start, before we get into some of this draft content, focus on how the New York Giants have handled free agency and how that kind of sets up for the draft. So overall, what were your thoughts on Joe Schoen's plan throughout free agency and how it's going to possibly affect the draft that's coming here in a little over 2 weeks?
Well, I always thought that, free agency is a way to fill holes, right? And I think the biggest need in free agency had always been a veteran defensive back. It was a room that was just way too young, and they needed veterans in there, and they got two of them, right? They got a safety with Javon Holland for a contract that is a bit smaller than Xavier McKinney's, who Brian Dable just lit up and gushed about when he had a chance to talk about him at the owners meeting. You can kind of hear when Daves gets like legitimately excited about something, his voice kind of goes up, and you can kind of sense that from him. And then Paulson Adebo. So I thought, the veteran DB corner more than safety was really a big part of what they had to do in free agency. They did that. And then the other thing they had to do was obviously figure out a way to make the quarterback room as such that you are not sitting here 2 weeks before the draft desperate to find your quarterback answer for 2025 with the draft pick at third overall. When I left the combine talking to people, I think the Titans legitimately were interested in moving that pick. I think the more they looked at Cam Ward, the more they said, we're not moving this pick. And I don't blame them. I wouldn't have moved the pick if I were them either. So you don't want to be sitting here at 3 having to draft a quarterback that can play right away. And I think Joe Schoen did a nice job of making sure that was not going to be the case. You got a little depth on the offensive line, which I think helped. I like bringing Greg Van Roten back. I thought that was a good move. You brought in some veteran special teams players to help you a little bit. So I thought it was overall successful to now go into this draft, guys, without, at least for 2025, a drop dead, we have to take this player at this position type of need.
Speaking a little bit further on the Javon Holland sign, I think that one was a bit surprising. I think you could go into free agency saying, look, at Dabo, we're going to go out and get one of these corners. But it was a nice, pleasant surprise when they signed a player like Javon Holland, who has some really good game film in his time with the Dolphins. I want to hear your thoughts on the decision to sign Javon Holland one season after passing up on signing a safety to a big contract. We were kind of under the impression that maybe Schoen viewed the position as one that he might not invest in cap-wise, but is it just an example of a good value player hitting free agency unexpectedly?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Remember, Xavier McKinney was also in the building with this group, so they knew more about him than anyone. So I think that influenced their decision, whatever, for whatever reason there was. I think that probably influenced it, right? And I think, remember, the cap goes up every year. So even, take it in consideration that money per year was lower and the cap went up. So it's an even lower percentage of the cap. So I think it was a better bargain. I know people have brought up, the guaranteed money's the same. Well, look, Xavier McKinney, I think, had a $8 million roster bonus this year, which is not technically in the guaranteed money pool, but they could not realistically cut Xavier McKinney before that $8 million kicked in. So it was basically part of the guarantee. So that brings McKinney's guarantee over based on what the reports are, at least, of what Javon Holland got. And look, I think they just knew that they needed help in the secondary. And he was, I think, one of the better players at any position on the market.
Yeah.
And I think they just know they need playmakers, guys. Like, this team desperately needs guys that can make game-changing plays. And last year, for a defense that was supposed to get more takeaways and get hands on the football more by playing more of his own scheme, it actually happened less than when it did under a man-heavy scheme in Wink Martindale. So I think they knew they needed guys. And Javon Holland, even though he doesn't have a ton of interceptions in the pros, you go back to his college tape when we evaluated him 4 years ago, that guy knows how to get after the football. He's got sideline-to-sideline range. And look, I think that is a big deal for the Giants, trying to get a guy that can maybe actually create a couple takeaways and make some big plays and get their hands on the football on defense, which is something they just did not do enough last year.
They had like 6 interceptions last season, I believe it was.
It was bad.
Yeah, you get Javon Holland, Paulson Adebo in the building. Now you have a young core in the secondary to pair with the pass rush that the Giants have: Dexter Lawrence, Brian Burns, and Kayvon Thibodeau. Still think this pass rush could be bolstered a little bit more, but before we get to that, John,
we have the draft for that, baby. Don't worry.
We got the draft for that. Before we get to that, I think we should maybe talk about Jameis Winston and Russell Wilson and this New York Giants quarterback room. What are your overall thoughts, your impressions of Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston in the press conferences, and how you think those decisions of bringing them in could affect the New York Giants heading into the draft?
I don't think it does. I never thought they were going to do the desperate and foolish thing of, bumping somebody too far up their board to take them, even if it was a big need. But look, the additions certainly make quarterback less of a desperate situation. So, for example, before the draft, before those 2 signings, let's say they did not sign those 2 guys and you're walking in here without the veterans. Like, you can't make Jalen Milroe your pick because he can't get on the field right away. So that would have not been a possibility. I don't even think Jackson Dart could have been a possibility. People talk about him like he's not a project. No. Jackson Dart's a project, guys. He comes from a college offense. It's going to take him time. And I'm going to throw this out there too. I know Pat Shurmur's his OC. That is not an NFL offense that they're running in Colorado. No. And I'll even say this now, even if they draft Shedeur Sanders at 3, I don't think he's starting over Russell Wilson week 1. I got to be honest with you. I just think Russell Wilson's better right now. And that's not a knock on Shedeur. Shedeur has a chance to be a good quarterback, but we had Bill Polian on Big Blue Kickoff Live on Monday, and I was asking about, on the second day, do you take more of a dart throw on a quarterback with a high upside, or do you pick someone a little safer? And he goes, there's no such thing as safer. No rookie quarterback is ready to play in week 1. I'm like, you know what? You're right. It was a stupid question. So I think now, like, if they walk away with Jalen Milroe as the only quarterback that they select in this draft, I'm fine with that because he does not have to get on the field for a year. Maybe more than that, depending on how the season goes and who they decide to bring back. So I think it just raises the floor of competency. There were too many games the last 2 years, guys, that we all watched, and you were walking into the game, or you got through a half of football and you sat there and you're like, just because of what's going on at quarterback, this team did not have a legitimate chance to win this football game, right? And that happened too often. Say what you want about Russell Wilson. He's not the quarterback that, led the Seahawks to the Super Bowl and won a Super Bowl. But even in his bad years, like his last year in Denver, when Sean Payton couldn't get rid of him fast enough, right? He had 27 touchdowns and 8 interceptions.
Yeah.
Go back to Eli Manning. That's the last time a Giants quarterback had 27 touchdowns and 8 interceptions. So that's a bad year for Russ. Last year people said, the season ended so terribly. Look at the teams that the Steelers played. The Eagles, the Chiefs, the Ravens, the Chargers were in that group maybe, but it was the Bills. It was a disaster. Like they played like half all the teams that were in the AFC and NFC title games. It was a mess. So he will raise your floor. He will give you a level of competency that I think really Brian Daboll wants, so he can show that, look, guys, my offense still works. You give me a quarterback that's a veteran and understands what I'm trying to do and knows how to run it, my offense is still going to work. And even with Jameis, there might be some bumps along the way, but at least the offense will be functional, right? He'll move the ball. He'll pass the ball down the field. He'll go through the progressions like a veteran. But so I think that was the key here, guys. Raise the floor and just give Brian Daboll a real chance here to show what the full version of his offense can do. And I'm not sure, by the way, that we've ever seen the full passing version of Brian Dable's offense yet. I'm not positive we have, but I think we will this year with two veteran quarterbacks.
As a lot of great points to unpack there. The only challenge I might have for that last part about seeing the full potential of his passing offense would be those Tyrod Taylor games in 2023. But I think even then the offensive line wasn't playing. No, I mean, look, they led the NFL in explosive pass rate during those weeks. I think he was at like 8%. And he had like some crazy number when a clean pocket grade. But even then, obviously I'm being a little facetious here. There's more talent, there's more upside here. Speaking of that quarterback position, I've always been under the impression that Brian Dable wants his offense to operate in a more vertical fashion as far as intermediate and vertical levels of the field. It seems on paper, looking at what Russell Wilson did last year, even during his time with the Broncos and then early in his career on the deep passing game, especially last year where he was one of the most efficient deep passers in the NFL, literally up there with the 3, 4, 5 best quarterbacks in the NFL. And Jameis as well in that regard, leading the NFL in air yards per game. Is this supposed to hint to us that like these guys were handpicked for a reason because they fit his system better than some of these other guys who are out there?
Brian Dable has been begging his quarterbacks to throw the ball down the field, guys. I mean, he just has been. That's what he wants. You listen to his post-game press conferences after the game and doing the post-game show on the Fan, I hear all of them. Every game, like, look, we got to get the ball down the field. Explosive plays win games. And you just haven't gotten enough of that. And I think, Russell Wilson throws a really good deep ball. Jameis Winston is certainly willing to throw the ball down the field, for better or worse. And, they will take those chances when they're available. And I do wonder if that's one of the reasons they decided they really were going to go the extra mile to bring back Darius Slayton, right? As someone that is good vertically. And now you throw in Jalen Hyatt, you throw on Malik Neighbors, who's good to get behind guys, but also make contested catches down the field. Like, I can't wait to see Russell Wilson just get that ball on the outside shoulder of Malik Neighbors going down the sideline in those small spots like he did with George Pickens last year. And Neighbors has the ball skills to make those plays. So, yeah, absolutely. I think making more explosive plays is certainly a huge goal. Look, it's been a huge goal. I haven't been able to accomplish it, but it certainly is a big goal for this year, especially with the two vets in the house.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Look, we all love to work out. The summer's coming around. You want to look good in your bathing suit. But in order to enhance your workout, you want to go and use MitoPure from Timeline. This is a great product. When I started using it, it makes me feel stronger, gives me more energy. I recover quicker. I'm in my 30s. I still have the energy to work out. And if you want that energy, you really should give Timeline's MitoPure a shot and work it into your routine. The great year of 2025 is your year to be the best, most energized, most revitalized you. MitoPure promotes cellular renewal and mitochondrial health to address common signs of aging at the root. MitoPure is the research-backed innovation that unlocks your fullest potential. Timeline is offering 10% off your order of MitoPure right now. So go to timeline.com/banter. It's timeline.com/banter. That's Timeline. I think they've ranked bottom 5 in explosive pass plays since 2019, and 3 of those years they were dead last. So one of those years was 2022, the year they made the playoffs and won a playoff game. So I'm 100% with you on that. And I wanted to bring up one position group that could help the explosive plays, and that is the wide receiver position. Talked about bringing back Darius Slayton. Absolutely love that. Have Wandale. Jalen Hyatt, not 100% sure what's going on there. Hasn't really seen the field, but he's still a young asset. Maybe he can grow. And then obviously Malik Neighbors. But heading into this draft, this is another deep wide receiver draft. I kind of want to just ask you, who are some of your favorite wide receivers maybe on day 3 in this draft that you think could come into this New York Giants room and be a little bit different flavor? Because again, they might not be in that initial 11 personnel package, but come in and do something and offer something just a little bit different to Brian Dable's offense.
Okay, I'll give you a couple guys that I like. That would be day 3 guys. I think Ty Felton is a player that probably will get to day 3, who I think gives you a little bit of everything as a wide receiver. He can run, he can catch, he's got good ball skills. I thought he was one of the best receivers at the Senior Bowl. I like him as a day 3 guy. If Savion Williams gets to day 3 out of TCU, he's basically Cordero Patterson, guys. TCU's offense was a mess. Like, you go and you try to watch Jack Besh and you watch Savion Williams, you're like, man, like if these guys had a quarterback, they'd be a lot better. I mean, he's 6'4", he's almost 230. He's good on contested catches, but he only had 12 attempts on contested catches. I think he caught 6 of them, if memory serves me right. This year, they use him on jet sweeps. They hand the ball off to him. He is like a real skeleton key to an offense where you can use him for a lot of different things. Isaac Tesla out of Arkansas, another guy that was really hampered by poor quarterback play. And Anthony Armstrong, his teammates, actually pretty good too. He's a guy that I think he gives you a little size at 6'4". He played the slot for them. So I think he gives you a little bit more size in the slot and overall speed. His athletic test at the combine was great. And then, look, I'm just going to be one of my favorites just because I just think he's a good player. And I had a 20-minute conversation with him at the Senior Bowl, and I think he's just a pleasure of a kid. And that's Tez Johnson. Look, I know he's 5'8". I know he's 150 pounds. I watched him at the Senior Bowl. Nobody could cover him. Yeah. Second-round picks, Trey Amos, Azare Thomas, who could be a first-round pick. Nobody could cover him. I know we ran a 4.5. I don't care. His 3-cone and short shuttle were off the charts at the Senior Bowl. He's a really smart player. Like, he's developed a relationship with Cooper Kupp, who goes over like routes and releases with him. Also Tank Dell, another guy that's a smaller wide receiver that's been successful. I don't think he's at Tank Dell's level, but he doesn't have that speed and explosion. But even look at his college film, like, he's always open. The guy just knows how to play. So those are some kind of day 3 receivers that I think can give you a little bit of juice.
Something about those Oregon skilled position players who are a little undersized, don't test that well at the combine, hit the NFL, and then they're just studs, a la Bucky Irving from last year.
Yeah. And by the way, the running back Jordan James isn't much different, by the way. I think he's very similar to Bucky Irving. He didn't test well, but he's just like a short comeback, good little running back.
There's so much depth at running back in this class. We're going to get to that position eventually. I want to take it back a little bit to the roster, though, to the current state of the Giants roster. I want to move a little bit to the offensive line. I want to start by playing a game here. And so you don't have to name a player if you're going to pick this option, but maybe say a pick. So say like 34 or 65 or, you know, even a later pick. If you had to predict right now, week 1, the Giants starting offensive line left to right, what would that be?
It's a good question. Joe Shane has spoken very confidently about the offensive line that played the first 6 weeks of the season last year. My gut feeling, and this is just a gut feeling, is that they probably feel better internally about the offensive line group than a lot of people feel on the outside. That's just my kind of gut feel for it. I would be fine picking a day 2 offensive lineman. I think you're looking at defensive tackle with one of your day 2 picks, almost for sure, assuming you're not using one of your day 1 picks on a defensive tackle. So, no, look, I think the starting offensive line week 1 will be the same one that started week 1 last year. Luminor right tackle, Van Roten right guard, John Michael Schmidt center, Runyon left guard, and Andrew Thomas left tackle.
Yeah, I mean, I think in that scenario, though, I think we'd both agree it would. Even if they do draft, if that's still their projected offensive line, they have the confidence. And by the way, for good reason, Nick and I have gone over this on the show. We had really high grades for their pass protection those first 6 weeks before Andrew Thomas' injury.
The offense was able to function just fine.
Yes. And in some ways, like, the offensive line did some of the best job consistently in pass protection that I've seen from them in years. Run blocking was still a work in progress. We'll see what happens on that front. They may not, in my mind, have the personnel for that, but we'll see. But
and by the way, just real quick,
yeah,
I think there's a shot Evan Neal could be the starter at right guard.
That's where I was going next.
I don't think it's out of the question. I don't. Do I think it's likely? No. But guys, I'll be honest with you. Like, what Evan Neal's issues are, I think they really get mitigated at guard. I think he has a real chance to be successful at guard. So we'll see if that happens.
I just love the idea of the duo blocks with Evan Neal and Jermaine Illuminor.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, those 2 guys are massive. Yeah, I'm with you. I think, you can run some power. I don't know about Neal pulling necessarily, but I think you can I think you run right behind Illuminor and Neal and you pull Runyon, who I think is probably a good puller. So you make that the strong side of your run game. And I think you can do some real damage.
And by the way, there are options if that does come about. Like, we could see potentially GVR getting some reps at center. That's something I'd personally be interested in if Neal takes off at right guard. So now you have more options and versatility there. But along the offensive line as it relates to the draft, this is something I've been wondering really to get your opinion on. We've seen a lot of Joe Shane drafts now, or a few, I should say. And at times it does feel, now I think he's matching talent with need, which is fine. It does feel like we are knocking out needs, though, in the draft. Yep. And one thing that is not a need right now, but is certainly a need long-term, is offensive tackle, is right tackle. And even you could stretch it if you really wanted to and say long-term left tackle, maybe just because of Thomas's injury history. I'm not willing to say that, but for sure one of the tackle spots is. Nick and I have kind of turned the page on Neal as a tackle, and that's okay. Do you view this regime as making that decision at some point to potentially, like, for example, in our mind, you really can't go that far down a draft class and get a tackle long-term. You can maybe hit an outlier, but really it's 34, that first round pick, which doesn't look likely, or nothing as far as my mind goes, is taking a big swing at the position. Is it possible you could see him taking that swing, even though it won't maybe help them for the 2025 season, with the idea in mind that we need this position filled long-term?
I agree with you. Remember, Jermaine Illuminor's contract's up after this
Right.
year. He's on a 2-year deal. And then my whole thing is that you don't want everything to fall apart and Andrew Thomas gets hurt, right? So if he gets hurt, I think you feel okay about Illuminor going over to left tackle, right? It's not ideal, but you feel okay about it. And Jermaine Illuminor would tell you, like, oh, switching sides is a pain. Like, he doesn't like doing it, but you have to do what you have to do, right? So I'm with you. You want to have, and I think, Joe Shane spoke highly of James Hudson, but I do think you need a long-term right tackle answer. Here's the problem. It's the wrong draft class to try to find one of those guys, even at 34.
Yep.
Like, if Josh Connerly is there at 34, I would pick him in a second. I think he's a really good player. Remember, though, you have to convert them from left side to right side,
right,
if you're going to start him. So that's going to be an issue. Other than that, day 2 tackles, I mean, trying to think of who even would be on the board at that point. I mean, I think Jonas Sevigny is a guard. I think Ryan Millam's a guard.
So I mean,
Banks,
probably
I
not.
guess Banks might kick inside. There are definitely some guys that could be guards.
I guess Ariante Ursary would probably be the one guy that I would think about as a tackle out of Minnesota.
Yeah.
But again, he's a left tackle and he's not a great mover. He's kind of like a big mauler type. So that would be my only second round offensive tackle I would feel good about being an eventual starter, I think, in my head. I don't see Bo as a guy that's a tackle. I think he moves inside to guard or center. So, yeah, I mean, if you want to pick the Texas kid as a project, that's fine, but he's not going to be ready week 1. I mean, Emory Jones at LSU, I see him as more of a guard than a tackle. So this isn't last year's class. So, I mean, even if you wanted to tackle at 34, and I'd be okay with that because I'm with you, I do think that's important. I just don't think that's where talent is going to meet need in this particular class.
So just due to the injury, what if Josh Simmons were to fall? I know it seems unlikely, but a patellar tear, you never really exactly know. And he has experience on the right and left side. That's one name that fits into what Dan is saying. I'm not necessarily convinced that would be where Joe Shane would go based on the talent that would be available at 34 to allow Joe Shane and Brian Dable to maximize their winning potential in 2025.
Do I think he would pick him? No, because I do think you're going to have a really good defensive tackle there that's going to be pretty highly graded. Though I do think there's a little bit of a gap, to be honest with you. Like, if that whole first group is gone, I think there is then a bit of a gap between that first tier and that next tier of defensive tackles. You could talk about that. I would take Josh Simmons there. I think he's awesome. You watch his tape.
Oh, he's smooth.
The scary thing, though, is that it's a really small sample size, guys. All right. It's 5 games, and 3 of them are against garbage competition. So there were really 2 real games in there, and like 8 snaps was against Iowa. Is that the game he got hurt in? I'm trying to remember.
He got hurt in Oregon.
Oregon game. Oregon. Thank you. And so, yes, the play was great, but we've seen guys have 2 great games and then crash back to reality too. So, yes, I like Simmons in that spot if he's there, but I don't think in this particular draft class where you're going to run out of first round grades before the 20th pick, I would be fall off my chair surprised if Josh Simmons was sitting there at 34.
Yeah, and it's funny because this conversation in a lot of ways mirrors the quarterback conversation, and I think it's a big 2 divides in the Giants fan base because if you're trying to invest in offensive tackle or quarterback right now, this may not be the class to do it in, depending on where you are. And I know you need it. I know you want it. And I know the end result is you didn't take a swing if you didn't do it at quarterback or tackle, but that's not how the draft works. It's a big thing we go through a lot. Like, you can't draft for need. You can't force these positions. So it's interesting. I'm curious about that. Now, let me ask you about the current group of, let's not say Giants offensive linemen. I'll ask you offensive side of the ball and defensive side of the ball. Is there a player on either side of the ball that the Giants are higher on right now than maybe the fans or we know about, just based on stuff that goes on behind the scenes at practice, some tape from last year, anything like that?
It's a good question. I think they really like Theo Johnson. So I think fans might not be completely sold on him, but I think inside the organization they are. I think they are big Theo Johnson fans. So I think that would be one for sure. Now, that wouldn't rule out for me picking a tight end in this class because it's so deep, right? If you can get a tight end around 4 and play some 12 personnel with more of a receiving weapon next to him, I think that could work too. Offensive, I would go Theo Johnson. On the defensive side of the ball, good question. I mean, are fans really high on Tyler Nubin? I don't keep track.
They should
of
be.
Stuff.
We're high on him in year 2 in this system.
Yeah, I mean, I would think it's probably the two defensive backs, right?
Okay.
Drew Phillips and Tyler Newman. I think they're big fans of those two guys, and I think they think they're really good players. So I think on defense, those would be probably the two guys I would list as guys that they really have a lot of faith in moving forward.
All players from last year's draft class, so that's going to be a key core component of this roster if they make it forward.
Yep.
Before we transition to even more, this can, I guess, we could group in the draft, but I really want to focus in on the running back position. So this is a deep running back draft class. We saw how Joe Shane was successful nabbing Tyrone Tracy Jr. in the 5th round, bringing him in. He had a really good season for New York. Still have Devin Singletary on the roster. We're not going to forget about him. But judging based off of this draft and maybe your ideas of what the Giants might do at that position group, do you think they may take a swing maybe a little bit later in the draft? And if they do, are there any running backs that you have in mind that could fit that? Dan and I have been big fans of Rutgers running back Kyle Monungai, and I know the Giants had him in for a local visit. So I just wanted to put that out there and give you the floor.
Yeah, I don't think running back is a screaming need. So I think even if they draft a back, depending on what type of back it is, I'm not sure how much they're even cracking the rotation with Singletary and Tracy. But I love this class, man. Like, you're going to get guys that might go in round 3 and any other year in like round 5 this year. That's how good this class is. Like, I've watched 15 running backs. I still have another 4 or 5 guys that I want to watch because I think I've seen enough where I'm like, all right, I need to actually put a grade on these guys. I think they're really good players. And I think the best part of this group is that there are guys of all different shapes and sizes, right? There are big guys. There are bruisers. There are explosive guys. There are receiving weapons. So there are all sorts of guys that check boxes. My gut feeling is that the Giants would probably lean towards trying to get an explosive guy. You guys talk about making explosive plays. I think they believe in Tyrone Tracy as a between the tackles, running back type guy that can carry the load, 15 to 18 times a game. But I think they would love to have that type of explosive back to pair with him to use as a receiver, sure, but just a guy that can, break something at any time, like a Jaden Blue, right? Someone like that. I love RJ Harvey. He's a guy I would throw into that mix. Bashal Tutin's another guy who I think are really good players that, might go round 3, round 4. But I think you just wait till round 4, round 5. And if you're picking the best player on the board, there's a good chance that best player on the board is going to be a running back. And, Devin Singletary signed a 2-year deal. That would be a very easy guy to just slide in there as the backup or co-captain to Tracy in the backfield, where you could have 2 guys with complementary skill sets kind of do their thing.
I love it. Adding explosive plays to the offense is a key for the Giants. It's funny that you mentioned those 2 names. Harvey, I think, is one of the best values in the entire draft, let alone at running back. He's an older prospect, so he's going to fall because of that. Same process with Tyrone Tracy. Watch what happened there. Trust the tape. Trust what you see, and that guy is an explosive runner. As for Tuden, I just did his film review. I like him more in like a outside zone scheme. I know that's what
100%.
And I think if he doesn't clean up the fumbles, like, he'll just never play. Like, I think he lost 9 fumbles, 1 out of every 66 attempts or something like that. But man, is he a fun watch. Like, when he makes that cut, when he gets his foot in the dirt and then changes direction, it's like, wow. And 4.32 speed, it's real. You see it on tape for sure.
Yeah, he's only 205, 208 pounds, whatever he is, but he's only like 5'8". So he runs a lot heavier and stronger. Like, when he makes contact on this, he'll lower his shoulder and he'll run over some DBs, man. Like, he will do his thing in the secondary and run with a little bit of power. So I'm with you, but I agree. I think he is an outside zone back. I think that's 100%.
But they can find a fit for him, and they are going to evolve that run game. And one thing you mentioned just there, he is actually top 5 in yards after contact per attempt, to speak to what you were saying with the strength. So,
and also, I think he was 3rd or 4th in missed tackles forced per attempt
top
as
5
well.
in
So
both.
he's high in that too.
By the way, those were 2 metrics that stood out with Tyrone Tracy when the Giants drafted him. Those top 5 in both. I think he might have been top 6 or top 8. But either way, interesting names to focus on for sure. I want to flip back to defense for a second. You talked about the Holland signing and the Adebo signings. Nick and I are under the impression that we really didn't get to see fully what Shane Bowen had in store, what he had in mind for building out this Giants defense, right? I mean, look, he had some great games in the beginning. I thought his Cincinnati Bengals game plan was one of the best game plans anyone had for Joe Burrow all season. But there were injuries at the end. And when Dexter Lawrence went down, it felt like the heart of the defense was out. Do you think that adding these specific secondary pieces, because I think back to his Titans days, and really the work he did with the safeties and having two reliable safeties kind of made the whole engine go on the defense. Do you feel like that's what their plan is with Newman going into year two? He's going to know the system better. And then obviously the big signing with Holland.
Yes, that's how you disguise, right? You disguise with your safeties. You know, is it going to be a single high? Is it going to be too high? Is it cover two? Is it cover four? What kind of cover four? Is it a cover four when one of the guys kind of drops down? And you disguise with your safeties. So you need two smart safeties that can do that stuff. And I think they check that box with Holland and Newman. So yes, what I'm curious to see, they have Deonte Banks, who is as we know, a really good man, or someone that has played a lot more man than zone. And I think Paulson Adebo is a player that excels in press man. So while I think on early downs, we're going to still see a lot of zone, when you get the third down, I do wonder if we're going to see him sprinkle in more man-to-man here with the type of corners they have, with both guys being physical guys that can attack at the line of scrimmage and be a little bit more adept in press man. Adebo has good zone tape from New Orleans. He just didn't do it as much. But I do wonder if we're going to see, you talk about seeing everything Bowen wants to do. I do wonder, too, if he's going to see what the personnel is at corner and say, all right, on third downs, I'm going to sprinkle it a little bit more man-to-man.
I would not be shocked if he does that whatsoever. Whether that's cover one, you could bring a fifth guy. Depending on what the Giants do in the draft, you might not even have to do that. You know, he's going to run his simulated pressure. Sometimes in the red zone, he's dropping Dexter Lawrence into coverage. He does a lot of funky things like that. So looking at this secondary, though, John, how pressing, or do you think the Giants may even look to target that? Because going into the draft, I watched a bunch of corners early on, and now I'm looking at the cornerbacks. And since the Giants added Paulson Adebo and they brought in Javon Holland, I'm a little bit more just like, hey, I don't think this is going to happen on day one or day two. And maybe if they love somebody and they fall on day three, they would go in that direction. But I'll group the safeties in here as well, because Dane Belton is entering his last year of the deal. How pressing do you think the Giants will have on their mind, hey, we're going to target the secondary in this draft? And again, I'm going to group the safety position in there, because I think you want some depth at safety, but I don't even think it's nearly even close to what I thought it was before they went out and did everything that they did during free agency.
Heading into the combine, I watched a ton of defensive backs.
Yeah.
Once free agency hit, I stopped watching defensive backs.
I feel
a lot of time on it. Yeah.
How many young guys are you going to put in the room?
Yeah.
I mean, Javon Holland, by the way, is only 1 year older than Tyler Newman, which is
Wow.
hilarious given how long he's been in the league. So he's only 25, if I believe so, right? Tyler Newman's 24. You have Drew Phillips, who's in his second year. Deonte Banks, who was a young player coming out, by the way. He's going into his third year. So I don't know how many more young guys you're going to put in there. Paulson Adebo is just 26, right?
Right.
So I'm with you. If there's a guy that's sitting there on day three that they love, they'll pull the trigger. I would be shocked if they use any of their first 5 picks, including their 4th round pick, on a defensive back.
I'm just laughing because it feels good to know the Giants actually do have a lot of young talent at a position and can go into a draft class. Like, we can in some ways rule out our premium capital for at least one of these positions. That's a good sign. It shows that your roster is evolving. I want to talk about another position as we move forward. We'll get to some draft specific stuff. I know people want to hear that, but linebacker is an interesting position with Nick and I. We're kind of unsure of where they're headed in that direction. So in our minds, maybe Okereke, not the best first year in Shane Bowen's system. He was such a perfect fit for Wink's system that I think the expectations maybe were a little bit too high, because he was never going to be in that same position. But McFadden, on the other hand, really took a step forward. There were some times where he was the best player on tape when we did our film reviews, and we would say best player of the game, McFadden on tape. So is this a position that you think might be, like, when does Joe Shane and this regime finally take that swing on a day 2 linebacker? Because we have guys that we love the kid from UCLA, Schlesinger, and we're just like, will the Giants ever be the team that tries to find their Fred Warner in the draft?
Yeah, I think he's the only one, though, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, like, if you want to look at good day 2 linebackers, like, does Barrett Carter get you excited? I don't know. So, look, I think same like the conversation we had with offensive tackles, right? This is not an off-ball linebacker type of draft.
Right.
So, I'm with you, though. Bobby Okereke heading into the third year of his contract. Micah McFadden's into the final year of his rookie contract, right? So they're going to have to make some decisions after the year. I would not be surprised if they pick a linebacker in this draft, round 4 or later to try to develop. I think they did like what they got out of Darius Musa last year, but I think you obviously need further development. I think people underrate how tough linebacker is to play in the National Football League. I mean, you're really being asked to do stuff that you're not even being asked to do in college, like just dealing with under center play action. Like, how many times have you guys seen under center play action in college? Like, you just don't see it.
You don't
so
see it
I
all.
think, it's a completely different game for these linebackers. And these good quarterbacks literally just go after these guys. They abuse them with their eyes, with motion. These offensive coordinators just trying to get them to take steps in the wrong direction with pre-snap motion, jet sweeps, or jet motion, stuff like that. So, look, it takes these linebackers a while. So, I think draft one maybe a year before you need one, because they're not going to be good the first year. It's just as rare that they are. So I'm with you. I do think it's a down the road type of need. Whether or not that's going to be this year, I don't know. I think 34 might be a little rich for even Schlesinger, and I don't know if he gets to the first pick in the third round. We'll see how that goes. So again, I just don't think this is a draft class where you're going to find excess value at that position. Though, there's some guys I like. Like I like Knight Demetrius Knight at Texas Tech. He's a good player.
Yeah.
Boss is a good player out of Oregon. He's a smart player. Tony Pauline, who I do draft season or draft podcast with, he loves Nick Martin. He thinks he's a really good player. I was actually impressed with Jack Kaiser at Notre Dame at the Senior Bowl. I thought he had a really nice week out there. So there are some players you can get, but I don't think they're like, every down Mike, go in there, play right away type of deal. But would it shock me on day 3, a guy that helps you on specials right away and you can work in as a off-ball inside linebacker? Absolutely.
Darius Musa.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, 100%. I think try to get a guy a little bulkier maybe. I think you want to get somebody because, that has a little bit of bulk. But again, all college does now is produce 220-pound linebackers that look like my running joke is when I go to the combine and I see all these linebackers at the podium, I try to find how many of them are bigger than what Landon Collins was when he showed up as a safety with the Giants. And like Jihad Campbell, I think was like and Knight too, were like the only 2 that I'm like, all right, I think they were bigger than Landon Collins.
What about Schlesinger? Because he weighed in at like 240 something, if I'm not mistaken.
He does not look 240.
He doesn't.
I think he might have had the big Poland Spring jug before he did the weigh-in. Remember, I always worry about the weight with the guys that don't do any testing. And I don't think Schlesinger did any testing at the combine, right? If I recall, I don't think he jumped. I don't think he did anything.
A lot of guys did
you can easily manipulate your weight if you're not going to do any testing at all. For the guys that run, it's difficult because now they weigh the same day that you work out. So before you would weigh a day or two before, and then you could do all sorts of shenanigans to mess with your weight. But if you're not going to do anything and then you come in a lot heavier than people thought you would, that's very easy to manipulate.
Dan, do you have any more questions for John about the overall state of the roster right now?
I think we can turn it forward to what everybody wants to hear about. Pick number 3.
Let's focus.
By the way, we managed to hit like 4 different draft positions just in the Giants.
Yeah, absolutely. We're professionals over here, John. So, John, let's focus on that number 3 overall pick.
Is that a big pick? Is that important?
I think it's very important, right?
Okay.
I think it's only a little important, maybe very important. I'm not sure. But look, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Shedeur Sanders, those are the 3 names associated with the New York Giants. Cam Ward's going 1 overall. I just want to get your opinions on not necessarily what the Giants would do, but what are your ideas of those 3 players and how do you think this is all going to play out?
It's funny. My stock line for the first couple months of the year was that this is not the year where you want to have a top pick because just compared to last year, there's not as many blue chip players. But I have since amended that because I think if you're in the top 3, you're good.
Yeah.
If you're picking 4 through 10, you're kind of screwed. But if you're in the top 3 and there's a guarantee that you're going to get either Cam Ward, Travis Hunter, or Abdul Carter, Carter and Hunter for me last year are probably, top 10 picks. And I think those are the only guys from this year's draft class that would have a chance. I'm not even sure it's a guarantee, to be honest with you. But I think a good chance that they would be top 10 picks in last year's draft, which was absolutely loaded at the top, right? Absolutely loaded. So that's how I look at that. So I think the Giants are actually in pretty good shape that way in terms of where they're selecting in the draft. And you notice the guys' names that I mentioned, right? I mean, the Giants are picking third, and I think the three guys I would love to have with that pick are Cam Ward, Abdul Carter, and Travis Hunter. Now, here's my addendum to that. No one understands more than I do how important finding a quarterback is. And if Drake May was sitting there, or Jaden Daniels was sitting there, or Caleb Williams was sitting there, I would select that player. I would even, in this particular draft class, think about J.J. McCarthy, just because I'm not foregoing a Malik Neighbors type to pick him, right? I would consider it. I still would have trouble picking him over Carter or Hunter. But if you're picking fourth in this draft class, I would absolutely pick J.J. McCarthy fourth in this particular draft class. I would do it without even thinking about it, to be honest with you. So it's very hard to evaluate quarterbacks. The professionals are bad at it. We don't have a chance.
Yeah, I know.
We just don't. We don't know what they're being taught. They're playing in a college system that's
Right.
nothing like what they're going to ask you to do in the NFL.
Nothing.
We don't know what they're telling them to do, how they're telling them to read, what they're supposed to read. We just don't know. And Joe Shane has said this, and I had a great conversation with Kurt Warner last year. We had this conversation. For the quarterback position, these private workouts, and this is what Bill Polian told us on Big Blue Kickoff Live on Monday, the private workout and the 30 visit for a quarterback is hugely important. I asked him what it was like to do that with Peyton Manning. He said it was a masterclass. He goes, he basically asked them more questions than they asked him. And he says that that's how you figure out how these guys process information, what they're looking at, how they identify defenses, why they made certain decisions that they did on tape. Because you can watch the tape and you could be like, well, I think this is why he did that, but that doesn't make any sense. And then maybe they'll tell you, well, no, I got coached up this way. Oh, okay, that makes a little bit more sense. So if the Giants get Shedeur Sanders into a room and they think he is this absolute football genius when it comes to reading things out and understanding offenses and that sort of stuff, and they're sold on him because of that, okay. I'm not going to argue with Brian Dable, who I think has a pretty good feel for what quarterbacks are going to be good.
So if they take him, I have faith that that's where they're headed. Like, that's why they did it.
Okay, I want to ask you guys a question now.
Yeah.
Let's hear
How
it.
far up would you be willing to trade up into the first round if Cinder starts to drop?
So we've discussed this on a recent podcast. Have you changed your mind on it, Nick?
No.
I don't think Nick or I are interested in trading up into round one for Shedeur Sanders. Yeah.
Not even if he's sitting there at like 25.
So again, for me at least, and I'll just be short with this. I either see it or I don't see it in the quarterback. And if I don't see like the high upside ceiling, I don't personally want to gamble, because I personally believe you can get average to somewhat above average play for no assets. The Giants just did it with Russell Wilson. I mean, a lot of people are down on Wilson, but he was at least an average to above average quarterback last season. So I need that ceiling to be really, really high, or else I don't want to invest that much.
So who are your high ceiling day two quarterbacks? I know who mine are. Who are yours?
I'll be honest, and this is another tough one to have to admit. I don't really have any besides Jalen Milroe for me in this specific class. And I know it sucks to say, I know we want quarterbacks, we have to get them, but we started understanding this was maybe not the best quarterback class. I feel like as time's gone by, we've tried to talk ourselves into all of these players. I could throw Dart in that, maybe, like we don't know what he can be processing wise, and he has some raw tools and good traits. So maybe that's another one I could potentially throw in there. But other than Milroe, I'm not all that sold on a lot of these
What about
guys.
Shuck?
Shuck was a guy I liked more, and then I started watching a little more, and I didn't see enough of a ceiling. I see actually more of a floor upside for him.
Ooh, I think there's ceiling
You
there,
like ceiling?
man.
Okay.
I think there's ceiling with Shook, dude. He's big. He makes all the throws. He's not Cam Ward level arm flexibility, but he has different arm angles.
Definitely.
And look, I have red-pilled myself into ignoring the fact that he's doing college for 7 years and was like Justin Herbert's like backup back in the day, and he's like 26 or whatever, and that's fine. I still struggle with him at 34. I think that's where you would have to take him, though, to be totally honest with you. And I talked to him briefly at the Senior Bowl. I think he gives off a good vibe. But that's a guy on day two that I'd be willing to pull the trigger on and roll the dice. I think he is remember, he was a really high recruit too, man. Like he is. Yes. He ran like what did he run? A 4.67, I think, when he ran the 40. He's a good athlete. He's a good player. Now, there's some crazy stuff on tape where he does some crazy stuff, but I'd rather coach that out of somebody than have to coach it into somebody, as we've seen in the past with the Giants. And I've gone through a roller coaster ride with Milroe, to be honest with you, just in terms of how I think about him. Because I started by thinking about him like you did, right? Where it's like, I watched him on TV a little bit, and you see the running ability, you see the upside, and you feel pretty good about it. Then you start watching the tape, and then what really did it for me was watching him in person at the Senior Bowl. It was bad.
I heard it was rough.
It was like I made like a Chuck Knobloch comparison with the yips.
You're the second person who told us this, by the way, from
really
Senior Bowl and watching it. Yep.
It looked like he was afraid to cut it loose. That's just kind of his style. He doesn't really like torque his hips and really let go if he's really an arm thrower. So that's probably what gave me that impression. But it was rough, man. And like his throwing it at the combine was a lot better. And then you go back, watch the first half of that Georgia game, and all of a sudden you're like, ooh, well, if he can just do this all the time, well, that's right. Pretty awesome. So I've kind of resold myself on Milroe as a potential pick at 34. And the reason I've kind of done it, you don't like pick a guy at 34 that's not going to help you in year one as a player. And as a thrower and a quarterback that's going to run your offense, Jalen Milroe is not going to help you in his first year. He's not right. Ready. It might be the Steve McNair 2 years to get him ready to play. But he is such a good athlete at 220 pounds that runs a sub 4.45 or high 4.3s, depending on what pro day time you want to believe, that I trust Brian Dable to come up with ways to use him where he's going to be a player that can help you win games on offense, even if he's, frankly, your third string quarterback when you get to week one, whoever the Giants are playing. So I've resold myself on Milroe, even though, look, if you just grade him as a passer, he's like a 4th or 5th round guy. Like there's just, it's not good. It's just not good, but he has so many tools. And the other thing that checks the box for me with him, he's an academic Heisman Award winner. The kid's super smart. And I was listening to Nate Tice on the 301 football podcast that he does. And Nate Tice will be one of the guys joining us on the Giants Huddle 2 over the next week or two. And he said he was talking to people at the combine, and he didn't bring it up. But unsolicited, multiple people brought up to him how Jalen Milroe blew them away in meetings at the combine. Just blew them away. Absolutely. So I'm more willing to bet on a guy the same way the Eagles bet on Jalen Hurts, by the way, who checks all those intangible boxes as well as the physical tool set. So combine that with, again, how you can use him in year one as like a slash Cordell Stewart type of weapon, if you will. And I'm willing to use a 34th overall pick, and he can sit there for a couple years behind 2 veteran quarterbacks, and you're rocking and rolling.
The dual quarterback package if the Giants go with him. Get really creative.
Ben Johnson, mixing a little what Ben Johnson did with the lateral backwards. You pitch it back to him. Now he's on the perimeter throwing or running. So I'll say this. I agree with your assessment, but I will say the deep throws I was actually impressed with Jalen Milroe. A ton of drops from Alabama. I think he has a more natural deep arm than a lot of the quarterbacks in this class. And a big thing that I think one of the guests, actually David Syverson, brought up, which I believe is so true, is when you watch Milroe, there are examples of him throwing in the deep ball, and he doesn't need to be hitching into the throw. He can do it off his back foot because his arm is explosive enough. And that's a big difference. A lot of these quarterbacks maybe don't have that. I do like that you brought up Schmeelk. I'll just say this. He was my original draft crush. I don't want to go fully against him because I love the things you brought. The arm angles, the talent. I actually think he plays on time better than almost all the quarterbacks in the class. The ball is out and it hits the receiver when he's coming out of his breaks on a more consistent basis than a lot of these quarterbacks I've watched. But it's the total package that makes me a little scared with both of those players. I just think, am I really going to want to pass up what's available at 34 for one of those guys? That's the biggest problem for me. It's that I think there's going to be such a quality starter there at 34, specifically on the defensive line.
And by the way, the other problem with Milroe at the Senior Bowl is that he never threw deep.
Right.
Like the way that it just worked out in one-on-ones and in the team, like he never actually uncorked a long ball while I was there. I might have missed it, but I rewatched all the practice tape. I don't remember him still throwing deep once. So he was just throwing all these short and intermediate passes where, to your point, is kind of where he struggles right now from an accuracy perspective. So like we did Tony Pauline and I did our podcast, and I go, Tony, if I'm him, if I'm his agent, I'm telling Jalen Milroe, dude, I don't care if the guy's covered. Just launch one. Like just show it off. Like show the tools, dude. And we just never happened to see it. But look, I'm with you. I think that's it. It's opportunity cost, right? And if a guy with a legit first-round grade, which I think is very unlikely, is sitting there at 34, would it be hard to pass on that guy? Sure. But I think more than likely or not, at 34, you're looking at a second-round grade, and I'd rather throw the dart at quarterback, no pun intended, than pick a guy with a second-round grade on him.
Okay. I like
Speaking
that.
of that pick 34, too, Dan and I have talked a lot about the defensive line at 34, just because there's a lot of depth. Now, I think Dan and I both have a little bit of pie in the sky when we start throwing out names like Derek Harmon and Kenneth Grant and Walter Nolan. I don't know if any of those three are realistically going to be available at 34, but there are still a lot of players at the defensive tackle position who may likely be available at 34. And even if the Giants wanted to get creative and say they didn't want to go with a quarterback, they could possibly even trade back and accumulate more assets and get somebody else at the defensive tackle position at 38 or 39, depending on what happens. But that's another point entirely. So, John, what are your thoughts with that 34th overall pick? And if you want to start with the defensive tackle position, who are some of your favorite players there?
Look, this is an extremely deep draft at tackle and edge. Those are where you're going to find guys up and down the draft. And I mentioned this before. I think there's a little bit of a gap when you get to defensive tackle, right? I think once you get past Mason Graham and Harmon, those are my two defensive tackles with legit first-round grades on them. Kenneth Grant I have is kind of a 1-2. I don't think any three of those guys will be there at 34. Walter Nolan, I'm not as high on him as everybody else. I don't know. Maybe I'm just not seeing it, but I don't think he's going to be there either. I think he's going to be a top 20, 25 pick. So then the question remains, when you're sitting there at 34, are you willing to pick a run-stopping defensive tackle in Tyleik Williams? Because he's probably your next best guy. And if not him, the next guy on my list is, is Darius Alexander out of Toledo. I have TJ Sanders also with the only other second-round grade that I have, but I have a little further back in the second round. I like Alexander. I think he's long, he's tall, he can rush the passer. I would like to see more production at Toledo, but you look at the tape, he is dominant, especially against the run. He's tossing people around. Just the sacks didn't come for whatever reason. So those would be the guys I would think about, but I think I might be able to find a better player than Alexander or Tyleik Williams in the second round. Maybe not, depending on how it goes. In terms of the edges, like I would love Ezeraku there. I don't think he's getting there. Shamar Stewart's not getting there. James Pierce is all the off the field stuff. And I like Nick Scarton. I've kind of soured on him a little bit as we've gone along. The weight fluctuations, not testing, there's just a lot of red flags there. Landon Jackson doesn't have enough pass rush juice, though I think he's a very safe player, and I think he's a very good player. So I think that 34th pick is you have to see who's there. And look, luckily we'll have a whole day to think about it, right, on Friday after the first round ends. But look, I think one of those defensive tackles, one of those edge players, I think there's a chance that one of Golden, Egbuka, and Burden drop. I don't think that's impossible. And those would be the guys I'm probably keeping an eye on. And if somehow Tyler Booker or Donovan Jackson fall to that spot, I'd be down for that too. But I don't think either one of those guys are getting out of the top 25.
I was just about to ask you that question. If there was a surprise pick position-wise at 34, what would it be? And you still think it could be a skilled position at wide receiver or tight end, possibly?
I don't think so, but I do think you might get some. I mean, tight end's a great class, man. Like, Do I love anyone that's not Loveland Warren at 34? That might be a little bit rich, though I'm a big Elijah Arroyo guy. That's probably a little rich for me. So I think you see what guy drops that you have a first or 1-2 grade on, and you go there. It could be a defensive tackle. It could be an edge player. I think one of these second-round corners will be there. But again, I'm with you. I don't think that's where they're going to go, whether it's like a Trey Amos, a Hairston, an Ezra Thomas, someone like that. So I think, look, it's always tough to figure out who's going to be there 33 picks into a draft, right?
Yeah,
but
especially this draft, too. This draft.
Dude, you wouldn't have so many surprises in the
so many round one
people aren't expecting. Like, people are going to be blown away.
Yeah, I agree with that.
When some random guy that they've barely heard of, that for people that don't follow this closely, you're going to be like, whoa, I never even heard of that guy. But I've been told from picks 20 to 50, like, it's a flat draft where it's going to be different from team to team, and the grades aren't that much different. And it's going to be wild. It's going to be really wild, and it's going to be fun.
I think it could even get that way earlier. You mentioned before, right after pick 3, it's kind of like throwing your hands up in the air. I think we're going to see some early picks in that range that are just like, wow, that guy was projected to go so much later, not that much later, but round 2, and he's now a top 12 pick. So that'll be interesting. One thing we skipped over because we dove deep into the quarterbacks, which is fine, but we didn't get if you had a definitive take on Travis Hunter or Abdul Carter for that pick at number 3. Say in an ideal world, in your scenario, it goes Ward and then Sanders at 2 to the Browns. Now the Giants are on the clock with both players available.
Yeah, I have 18 first-round grades, by the way. So that's where
Okay.
my line is right now, which I think is probably maybe a little bit more than some people have. I was kind of going back and forth on a couple of the edgy guys. If I'm choosing between Hunter and Carter, which I don't think will be the case, if you tell me that Abdul Carter's injuries are not a problem, I think I probably take Abdul Carter. I just think he's really safe, and these edge rushers are just impossible to come by. And I love Travis Hunter, and I would have no problem picking him there. My hot take is I think he'll play more offense than defense for the Giants, at least in year one. Though I think he's a better corner than a receiver right now, generally speaking. But we haven't seen him run. Tony Pauline has estimated that scouts think he's kind of a 4.52 type of guy if he would have ran a 40. His ball skills are tremendous, but let's be honest, he's pretty raw as a wide receiver. Like, he doesn't run a full route tree, and he plays so many snaps a game, which is why I think his tape is a little challenging too, because it's like, all right, well, this is snap 125 for him. He doesn't look like he's running that fast. Well, no crap. It's snap 125. So I would go Carter just because I know exactly what he is. There are no questions. And, who are the highest paid non-quarterbacks in the National Football League? They're all edge players, man.
Yep.
You can find corners in free agency. You can find wide receivers up and down the draft. Now, the elite ones don't hit free agency. They're hard to get. But you already got one of those in Malik Neighbors, right? Are you going to run into the same issue that the Bengals had where you got to pay 2 wide receivers all this money when you're building your team? Again, that wouldn't be what stops me from doing it, but it's a tiebreaker, right? So if you tell me he's healthy, it's Abdul Carter. If there are legit long-term issues in terms of his injuries at all, yellow flags even, I would swing towards Hunter because I'm not willing to take a risk like that at pick number 3.
Makes sense. And yeah, go ahead, Nick.
No, I was just going to say you can't go wrong in the position that the New York Giants are in right now. And with Abdul Carter, we talked about this, I think, on a podcast like a week ago, Dan. Dexter Lawrence pushing the pocket, Brian Burns screaming off the edge, Abdul Carter screaming off the edge. What are you doing with your offensive protection package? I just want to put that fear inside of every offensive coordinator.
And by the way, then draft the defensive tackle at 34 and put him next to Dexter Lawrence. How about that?
Yes, and whether that be Tyleik Williams or Darius Alexander, like that just makes me salivate as a New York Giants fan, as somebody who covers the New York Giants, because I understand what Shane Bowen would be able to do in any 3rd and 5+ situation.
And you're building your team up front, right?
Right. Finally.
Have you done enough on offense? Maybe not yet. But look at how the Eagles build their team, man. Look at how Dallas has built their team. Look at how these good teams build their teams. They build them with really dominant players up front.
Yep.
And you cannot go wrong drafting a good edge player or a good defensive tackle. They're always going to play. They're going to get on the field, and they're going to help you win games.
And it's funny because I always talk about how, like, Nick and I don't want to prescribe to drafting for need, but I do think in this class with the depth of defensive tackle, interior defensive line, and edge, that if you're drafting them on day 2, you're actually also getting the best players available. So for me, this one's really clear. I really will be disappointed. And look, I like Arroyo. I like a lot of these skill players that could be there at 34 or even 65. But I'm just at the point where I need trenches right now. I need to take those swings with those high assets at those places when I know those will be some of the best players. But on the flip side, you mentioned, and I thought you did a great job breaking it down, some of those D tackles and the IDLs pie in the sky Nick and I are hoping might be there 34, might not be, very realistically won't be. And maybe the value play is going to be to wait till 65 to get that interior defensive lineman, because you're not going to get that big of a drop off as you broke down. So as we relate that back to 34, I'm just trying to think of other, like, if they want to go that route, if they believe that, other surprises. Like, do you think it's possible? Because when they did this last year, I thought when they took Tyrone Tracy, they were taking the best player on the board by their grades. No position, just their best player. He was the best prospect in my mind that was available. Is it possible they could be at 34 with a player like Omari and Hampton or something like that, or even at 65 if they go defense earlier, where they could say, you know what, this running back is the best player on the board in this specific class. We can't pass him up. It's a bit of a surprise, but we want to add talent to this offense.
The funny thing is that there are so many good running backs, I might end up pushing them down, right? Because teams keep saying, well, I don't want to pick one now. I'm just going to get a great one next round, and we're going to be fine, right?
And you will.
So I think, that could happen with tight end too, by the way. Like, there are 5 or 6, I think, 5, 6, 7 guys with starting grade tight ends in this draft that are really good players. So I think that might push running backs down a little bit. I would be surprised if a running back goes at 34, though. Look, you never know. I think you'll get a really good player there if you had to pick one. You know, if it's, I don't know if Marion Hampton gets there, but if Caleb Johnson, Quinshon Junkins, like I talked about getting an explosive guy next to Tyrone Tracy. How would you like Travion Henderson and his speed next to Tyrone Tracy, especially with his pass protection ability?
Yeah.
So look, I think there would be value there at 34 picking a running back, no doubt about it. But I don't feel like Joe Shane will go there in terms of selecting a running back at 34. Do you think they pick an offensive lineman there?
That's where it's in reality, you want them to consider it, but you did a good job breaking down earlier. I don't know if the talent's going to match up there. This is not a great offensive line.
Right. Would you pick a guard there?
That's what I think would make the most sense. I'd honestly even be open personally to center. Unfortunately,
I don't think there's a center that's good enough to get.
There's not. There's
not. Zabel as a possible center option.
That's where I think
he ain't getting the 34, bro.
He's not going to get the 34. Not after what Graham Barton did, and Barton was so good in his first season and moving to center, and he's a very similar prospect in a lot of ways. So I agree. But if you were, that's something that, because we're looking for potential surprises, but maybe it isn't a surprise, right? Like maybe the Giants just draft into the strength of the class because they need it too. And also you're accomplishing the goal of building the trenches out. If you go edge and D tackle on day 2 and Travis Hunter in day 1, like you are putting together an insane defense.
Would you double up on defensive tackle in this class? Would you pick one run stuffer and one smaller 3 technique to rush the passer?
See, that's something that Dan and I have talked a lot about. We talked to David Syvertson last week, and he was a little bit more against it. But Dan, I don't want to speak for you. I would support that. And then the DJ Davidsons of the world, the Jordan Riley's, is unfortunate, but hey, we need to beef up the trenches. We need a big dude there, and we need somebody who can penetrate, somebody who can get upfield. And this draft class has both of those things. So if the value and the board falls a certain way, I would 100% endorse that.
So I mean, there's a possibility here, and I think the first 5 picks are the premium picks, right? Because they're all in the top 105 or whatever it is. There's a possibility of walking out of those first 5 picks with 2 defensive tackles and an edge player.
Right.
And those are 3 of your 5 picks with Abdul Carter, the 2 defensive tackles, and then who knows what the other 2 might be. Maybe you're picking an offensive lineman there and you're getting 4 guys in the trenches. Who knows? But like I think you lean into the strength of the class because that's where the best players are going to be. And if that's where the best players are and you pick, you're never going to make a mistake picking the best player. And Dan, you said this. I've gotten that complaint too from Giant fans. Oh, Joe Shane just picks for need. Like Deontay Banks, that's where he was.
That was great value at great prospect at that point. Yep.
That's who, like, we were talking about targeting him, like at the combine that year. It's like, oh boy, but I don't think he's ever going to get that far, and he did. Like, I don't feel like they've reached off of like a consensus type board for a player out of need since Joe Shane's been here. Now, will the picks worked out? No, but just going off the consensus board, there have not been many, if any, serious reaches. Maybe Wandale Robinson was a little bit. I was going to say,
I would contend his first year with Wandale and Azudu. Those were the only 2 that were kind of way above consensus.
I would put Flott in there as well, even though it's a little
Flott as well, even though we liked the prospect of him. But he was projected a little bit later. But again, that was year 1, and he didn't have his scouts. And it was a different ball game.
Absolutely. Yeah, I was just about to say that same exact thing. I can't believe these guys are already entering their final year in the contracts.
It's gone by fast.
Crazy.
It has, but I really like that what you brought up there, and it's going to be interesting for me to see if they go that route, because to me that route is kind of touching on what we discussed before with offensive tackle at 34. We agree there may not be available options that make sense there, but if you go to defensive lineman, you're essentially saying, look, we're building a team out, and it's not just building a team for 2025. We're building a team out for the future of this franchise, and we understand the best way to do this is to get our trenches, like you said, the Eagles, the Ravens, all these teams that are winning consistently, build them out.
Here's the question. Brian Daboll's the head coach of this team.
Mm-hmm.
He likes offense.
Yeah.
Would he let this team walk out of Friday night without one guy that's going to touch the ball and try to score touchdowns for you?
I hope so. I hope the answer is so. Personally, just looking at this class, the reason being I want that decision to start, investing these premium assets, not on these playmakers, but on the trench play. So, but I'm not sure.
Will the offense, how about this though? Will the offense be good enough if they don't?
I think they can be. I believe in the playmakers they have, but it's a big leap and it's a big jump. And I understand why fans would be skeptical. I do think a lot of what held them back over the years was quarterback play. It's my evaluation from watching the tape. It may be wrong, it may be right, but also offensive line play. There's no denying 2023 was a disaster. Yeah. And at times after the Thomas injury, there were disasters as well on the offensive side. Though, by the way, this past season when all those injuries started happening, would you agree it was the best of our makeshift offensive lines we've had over these last 10 years? It wasn't good, but at times over the 10 years when those injuries started piling up, it was a disaster week in and week out. So I feel like Priscillo has done a good job of shoring things up. So I feel a little bit more confident that way. So for me, it comes down to, I do believe in the playmakers. I do sort of, in a lot of ways, believe in Priscillo and that line. So I think with a great defense, they can find a way to win, but it's hard to say because they didn't score a lot of points last year. So on paper, it seems like they really shouldn't come out of Friday without an offensive player.
I wouldn't be overly shocked though if one of those receivers did fall and that ended up being a pick. Right. It just depends what receiver archetype does Brian Daboll want to add to this offense? Is he looking for one of those bigger guys? And again, I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier. This receiver class, it's not really big at the top. There's no Malik name, none of that, right? If you're depending on how you view Hunter, right? But there's depth, and you can get some of those guys maybe post 100.
Right.
I love this day 2 receiver class, man. I think there are probably a dozen players that I would feel good about selecting on day 2.
Yeah.
That I think you're getting good value. And again, different types of guys. You got bigger guys like Jaden Higgins,
right?
Alec Iomener, Savion Williams. I mentioned him. You got small. Trey Harris is a bigger receiver, right?
Kyle Williams is going to be a good day 2 pick for whoever gets him.
Who's that? Savion?
No, Kyle Williams. I like.
Kyle was another guy. Texas Tech, right? Jalen Noel is another guy who's I think is he looks like Lad McConkey to me.
I like that.
Yes, I think he's going to be very, very good.
And then what about someone like Jack Besh too? Like I know a lot of people with this big slot. Should we be thinking, oh, the slot receiver is solidified here? Is that a mistake for Giant fans to be thinking? Or maybe since Wan'Dale does only have 1 year left, and I'm not saying he's gone for certain, but selecting someone like Besh, that gives you a different type of slot, a much different type of slot receiver than Wan'Dale Robinson. And that also adds to your 11 personnel package. And I know the Giants signed little Jordan Humphrey and all these receivers, but Jack Besh is a much different type of actual receiver than those players in regards of what they offer your offense from an explosive standpoint. So I wouldn't necessarily rule it completely out.
I agree with you. And I had not watched Jack Besh before I got to the Senior Bowl. And I watched him there, and I'm like, all right, he made some nice contested catches, but he's not really separating deep. I don't think he's very fast. And I finally got around to his tape, and that guy is a phenomenal route runner.
Yeah.
The way he transitions at the top of his routes in and out of breaks, it's like Cooper Kupp-ish, just the way he can just change direction. And if you look at his 3-cone and short shuttle drills at the combine, it shows up with his athletic testing. So his ability at the top of the right is second to none. He does not have a drop the last 2 years. His hands are phenomenal. Don't let Sean McVay draft that dude because he is going to be an unbelievable player if he winds up there. I think Isaac Tesla is another guy. Don't let Sean McVay draft that guy either. Another guy that I think will be really good there if he winds up somehow on that team. Jalen Royals, I think, can go into that category as well. But yeah, look, I like Besh. I think he can play outside too. I don't think he's a slot only because I think he does have contested catch X receiver skills and operating in not a lot of space, even though he doesn't have the speed to win over the top. But yeah, look, I think there is a sneaky wide receiver need here where if the Giants find there is value, and again, I think you mentioned Kyle Williams, another guy, really good player, where you can find someone on round 3 or round 4 that can develop into someone that can help you.
I really like that call. If we're looking for even on day 2, as you mentioned, if we're thinking any surprise, right? It seems cut and dry. It's probably going to be O-line, D-line, or edge, but it could easily be that wide receiver position. And Betch is an interesting one. I'm actually reminded of a different player. When I watch him, I'm reminded of watching Dalton Kincaid at Utah and how they used him and in the same way he won. And I've been so disappointed in how the Bills have utilized him in their offense. And I don't know why they draft him so high if they weren't, going to use some of those concepts that work for him. But the way
as someone who's a Dalton Kincaid fantasy owner, I heartily agree with you, my friend.
I bought into it 2 years in a row too, John. Literally, I bought back in last year and it was very disappointing. But thank you so much for joining us tonight on Big Blue Banter. We've really touched on the full gambit of stuff. Maybe we can leave the viewers off with one final thing, and it would be, do you have, and you've gone over some already, so maybe it's just somebody you missed, or do you have a sleeper that you're thinking about for the Giants on day 3 that makes sense? It could be somebody they've had in for a top 30 or a local visit, or just somebody you've watched on tape that you really like.
Good question. I'll go a couple of different. I'll just kind of run through my board here. I'll
I
go
like it.
position by position. Okay. I'm actually a bigger Quinn Ewers fan than I think most people are.
Okay. Arm
Um,
talent's there.
like if you don't if you don't find a guy in round 2 and Quinn Ewers is sitting there with your 3rd round pick, I would have no problem picking Quinn Ewers. I love the way he approaches the game. He's just very inconsistent. So I think that's a guy where there are tools. So I think that's a late day 3, late day 2. I don't think he'll get the early day 3 guy that I'd be willing to roll the dice on. I mean, I don't know when he's going to go because of the 40 time. I think Cam Scatterbo is a great running back.
Love Cam.
He's just fun. He breaks tackles. He's a good blocker. He catches the ball out of the backfield. Again, the 40 time doesn't bother me, to be honest with you. I think I already mentioned my guy, RJ Harvey.
Yeah.
I'm a huge, and again, this isn't really a sleeper, but it's a guy that I like. I think Dylan Sampson is phenomenal. I know he's not big. He's only, 200 pounds, but his ability to run away from guys in small areas and accelerate, I think, is one of the best traits in this class. You want a boring but good running back, go draft Devin Neal in the 4th round.
Yep.
He's not a super athlete, but he knows how to find the hole. He's big. He'll grind yards out. Just a good player. He's a good, solid football player. So Devin Neal, round 4, pick him. He'll run it, 18 times a game for you, average 4.3 yards per carry, and he's going to be a good player. I mentioned my wide receivers. I won't go there again. I think Gunnar Helm is the guy that's going to be better than what people think. His testing at the combine was terrible because he hurt his ankle. I like him. I think Mitchell Evans has some day 3 from Notre Dame chance to be a halfway decent player. So I would think about him. On defense, I don't know. Tony Pauline tells me that there's a lot of love on the streets for Omar Norman Lott.
Yeah.
As a guy that I thought I could get in round 3 as a pass rushing defensive tackle. Tony tells me that's not going to be the case.
Okay.
That there are too many teams with round 2 grades on him that he doesn't think he's going to make it. So I would worry about him getting there. Oluwafemi Oladejo out of UCLA. He's starting to pop up in these 2-round mock drafts, and I'm getting very upset about it because I thought that was a guy that I might be able to get in round 3 or round 4 as well, as the guy who's only played 1 year at edge, but has all the physical traits. So he might not get there, but I do like him a lot as a player. Josiah Stewart, I think, is an undersized, I think he's a Josh Uche type, except he's a little bit better against the run than Uche was coming out of Michigan. Corner, I haven't gotten that deep. No one I love. I mean, Darian Porter, I think he's, 4th round guy that has a lot of tools that I would take a gander at. And then at safety, I actually have Xavier Watts graded higher than Malachi Starks, which I think I'm probably going to be out on an island on that. I have 2nd round grades on both of them, with Watts just a little bit higher than Starks. And I know Starks is a smart guy. People have made the Brian Branch comparison with him. I don't think he has the twitchy slot cover ability that Brian Branch has. And he's just not very big. I think you want to play him in a deep safety role. I haven't played downhill. He has some bad missed tackles on tape, but I do think overall he's a good tackler. Good player again. And it's funny, going into the Watts tape, I didn't think I was going to like it. I thought we would have some Stevie Brown vibes where the other team just kind of
what a throwback.
That just like they throw him the ball and he's just standing there and it goes to him. Now, there are a couple plays where that does happen, but that guy reads the quarterback and make plays on the ball. Like, he's a smart safety. So, again, I don't think the Giants are going to draft him. He's going to go too high. But that's a guy that I think I'm probably a little higher on than other people. And then you want the best run-stuffing safety in the class, Kevin Winston out of Penn State. He's coming off an ACL. But, man, that dude fills and he tackles fundamentally with physicality. So I think whenever you can get him, if you need a strong safety that's going to play around a line of scrimmage, I think Kevin Winston's going to be a very good
Some coordinator is going to find a role for him that he loves and envisions going to take him higher than people expect, even off the ACL. I completely agree with that. Maybe it's Bowen, maybe it's not, but that's great. And thank you for all those sleepers, John. That was awesome. What stood out to me was a lot of running backs in there, and I like a lot of these running backs too. I really strongly feel that if the Giants don't come away with a running back in this draft, they made a mistake personally, just given all the picks that they have.
And by the way, 2 receivers there that I didn't even mention that could be like 6th round picks. Brashard Smith, who's a converted wide receiver. And then I love Marcus Yarns out of Delaware, who I think is going to be a really good receiving running back.
I actually haven't seen any of him, so that's somebody I got to put in my notes right now after this and watch a little bit of. But John, this was awesome as always, man. You really dove deep into all this stuff. We touched on a lot of Giants, we touched on a lot of drafts, so we'll have to see how things go. But thank you so much for your time, and why don't you let the listeners know one last time where they can find all your content for this month? We got 3 more weeks of the goal line.
No, and it's less than that, dude.
No, it's 2 on Thursday. Oh my god.
It came faster this year. I'm not sure it's because the Giants did late stuff in free agency with the quarterbacks and has made it seem shorter than it was. But whatever the case might be, dude, like it has come fast. I think, usually the draft is more like the 30th or 29th, and it's the 24th this year. So I think we lost a week that way just because of the way the calendar fell. But we're grinding them out. Giants Huddle Podcast is the main one. You can find it on the Giants Podcast Network podcast feed, Giants app, giants.com/podcast. Great guests coming up. I mentioned some of them over the course of the show. Check it out. Great ones already up there. Charles Davis and Matt Miller this week are up there. The guys did a really good job. And then Big Blue Kickoff Live. We're live every day at 12:30 to 1:30. We take calls. We have guests. Let's see. Tomorrow we're having guys that cover Texas A&M and Penn State coming on the show. So we'll get the inside scoop on some of those defensive players we've been talking about from those two schools. Today we had Mike Pritchard, former Falcons wide receiver and also Colorado alumnus, talking about Colorado with us. We had Bill Polian on Monday. And then if you're just into the draft season, that's our third podcast. Yep. It shows up on that same Giants Huddle podcast feed. Tony Pauline and I, we just go up and down. Our next episode is questions and sleepers. So we'll have a lot of fun stuff coming up. Can't wait to be able to take a deep breath when this is all said.
I was gonna say, man,
take like a week off, bro. I'm
multiple
struggling.
podcasts. The guy's doing multiple podcasts, the live show. I literally don't know how you find the time in the day for this or at least to sleep at any point. But I love the new room you got down there for podcasting. So you did something right on your off time. And thank you so much again, John. For everyone else listening, and please do us a favor. We've dropped a lot of these interviews lately. Hopefully, you guys have enjoyed them and some of our profiles as well. Please hit the like button and please leave a comment in the section to juice that algorithm, get it going. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're almost at 10K. We're trying to get there by draft day. So please help us do that. Otherwise, have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you soon.